Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Desire.
Oh, man. And my erstwhile friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known and what erstwhile means. Stay tuned as Curt breaks down his bombastic vocabulary.
Oh, my gracious.
Oh, I have
just
to say,
getting started.
You know, laughter is so good, isn't it?
It is, man.
It's a gift. It is just a wonderful gift.
Yeah, I mean, think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, you look around. What other creature, unless you're in a Gary Larson, in a comic strip,
right?
We kind of project onto other animals laughter when
sure.
But like no other animal does this,
right?
And it is. You're right, man. It is like somebody, like God had to, like, hey, what if we do this?
Right?
What if we do this?
Right.
Hey, check this out. And
right.
And then like the Trinity and the entire like divine council, they all just like crack up
laughing.
Yeah,
right.
like
and let's make it infectious. Let's make it exactly. One person does it, the other person does it.
Okay, yeah, it's like God gathers everybody around, all the divine council, and then Jesus stands up and like does a stand-up routine.
Yeah.
And they're like, who came up with that?
Yeah.
How'd you guys do that?
Yeah. Yeah. I love laughter. It's one of my absolute favorites. It is. And
gosh.
There's a universal language to it.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
We can be in a room with people that don't share the same language, that can't communicate with one another, and something can happen that can make us laugh, and we all laugh together, and this thing happens. It's amazing. I mean,
dude, it is.
And I have found, and I don't want to go too long with this, but I have found, like in live events and things that I produced, if you can get a room to laugh, hearts will open, minds will open to hear ideas and things that they wouldn't otherwise, that they would be closed off to before they have that universal experience of laughing. And it loosens them up. It brings us together. It's just a great thing. It's just a great gift.
Well, I mean, like, think about it. I mean, I'm still like, my mind is immediately going to the hallway in the hotel where I'm leaning against the wall to keep from falling onto the ground.
Right. I mean,
and oh my gosh.
So much of like our relationship, the beginning of it was so centered around laughter and has continued for all these years. And
my goodness.
I count it as one of the blessings of my life. So
right on. Me too.
It's awesome. Yeah. Well, listen, we have some things we need to talk about today, other than laughing, although I'm sure we'll have a few laughs along the way. Yeah. We are in the course of this series of the Being Known podcast, where we are going through Curt's book, The Deepest Place, Suffering and the Formation of Hope. And today we are going to be jumping into chapter 3, which is a declaration of war and peace. Hopefully by this point you have the book. If you don't, it's not too late. I encourage you to go out and get it wherever you get your books, and join with us here as we journey through chapter by chapter and really dig into to the words that Curt has written. I'm excited about today, Curt. There's some great storytelling going on today, and I think that we're going to have an opportunity to think about things in ways that we haven't thought about them before. At least as I was reading it, that's what my experience was.
Yeah. Well, you're right, Pep. This is a book that it has to do with suffering, and you might think we're going to just jump right into suffering and name it and describe it and define it, and then we're just going to figure out what to do with it. But we're using Paul's letter. We're using part of Paul's letter to the Romans, the church at Rome, as a guide for this. And one of the first things that you see I mean, Paul was no stranger to suffering. He was he was well acquainted with it. But he did not think about his life of suffering with suffering being the defining element of it. Suffering wasn't defining itself. It didn't set the context. Suffering was taking place in a larger context for him. For us who are Jesus followers, we would say that suffering, if we want to consider suffering, we have to begin before the suffering. We have to begin with the Christian story, honors suffering by beginning before it starts to happen. And for Paul, this place begins in the first verse of this text, which we've been walking through. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to suffering, we remember that we are being formed into the image of Jesus. We don't begin with suffering, we begin at the beginning. It's like what we like to say. In the last episodes, we've been talking about trust and faith and justification. And this leads then to this next verse. Therefore, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. We have peace. Why does Paul, what's it got to do with peace? Why do you have to say that? Now, those of us who live in the West in particular, especially in North America, we just don't have much of a context for being at war. Unless we've been recently, in the last 25 years, unless you've been to the Middle East, unless you're in the armed forces, or unless you live in a part of the country or a part of your city where violence is perhaps a common thing, the notion of being at war in the like outward combat way that the people of the first century where Paul was writing, unless you have that kind of a context, but war isn't a common thing for us. We don't think of it in those terms. And so therefore, we don't have much of an idea. We don't think in terms like we're at war with God. But in Paul's context, when he was writing this, he's writing into a context in which he's acknowledging the long and ancient trail of violence that we humans experience. If you think about even Pax Romana, right, the Roman peace. The Roman peace, it was always coming at the point of a sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll bring you peace. Pay your taxes and you'll have peace. Have sex with me because I'm a citizen and you're not, and I can do with you whatever I want to do, and we'll have peace. Otherwise, we'll send our legions. And so this notion of peace in the way that we tend to think of it is not the peace that people had at that time. And when you look even at the text of the Hebrew Bible, you see pretty quickly that from the very outset, after you get past the first two chapters, the violence begins. Where the serpent violates the woman, and that violates the woman and the man's relationship, and then they start blaming everybody, and then they believe that they're at war with God. This notion that when God then comes walking in the cool of the day at the end of Genesis chapter 3, and they hide because they're sure God's coming to kill them. And we see that this violence of shame, we've talked about this in other seasons, that shame is a violation. When we shame others, we violate them. It is an act of violence. And that shame of Genesis chapter 3 leads to the extension and expansion of violence. You get from Genesis 3 to Genesis 4, you have Cain and Abel. Cain can't tolerate this felt sense of inadequacy, and so he kills his brother. And that shame and violence, as we've also talked about in other episodes, it doesn't just shape our experience, but it shapes my capacity to perceive and make sense of my experience. And so I become someone who is, I perceive that the world is a violent place, even if I have all of my protections that I have in my house, in my neighborhood, in my economic level of accomplishment and so forth. I have all these things that, convince me that I'm not in a violent world. They're really just protecting me from the part of me internally that really believes, that has me primed to believe that I'm at war, not just with my world, but ultimately with God, because this is the chain of how we blame things, right? The woman you gave me, right? Adam starts by blaming God. Adam does not take his own responsibility for this. And so the woman you gave me, the woman says, the serpent that you put in the garden, there is this chain reaction, but at the end of the line, it's God.
It's you. Yeah. Yeah.
God's the one who's responsible for all this. God made the serpent did to the woman, the man, Cain and Abel, all that. Just as the ancients believe, we're just simply not aware that we believe it. That we're at war with God. The things that we blame in the world that we're at war with, I mean, dude, if you're in the Middle East right now, at the time that we're recording this, there's no end to people that we can blame and that we will blame.
Right.
That we're not going to take responsibility for our violence. I'm going to commit violence because somebody did something to me. But all of those people that we blame, as it turns out, at the end of the day, are all proxies for God. They're all proxies for him, and they're just stand-ins. In the same way that in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, all those folks were proxies for God. But our kind of accessoried life that we've developed and maintained, it protects me from that and protects me from my awareness that I'm at war. But it turns out that just like the ancients, who would offer sacrifices to their gods so that their gods wouldn't be pissed.
Right.
So that their gods wouldn't go to war with them. We do the same thing. We just have different gods. We have gods of sex. We have gods of the economy. We have gods of workaholism. I have gods of, you name it. I have all these things that I worship, these idols that I've constructed that don't look exactly like they might have. They don't look like wood or metal or bronze or whatever. But no, they're there. They're in my mind. I've made them, and I'm working really hard to appease them, even though I'm not aware that that's what I'm doing, but to make sure that they don't become angry. Because if I were to pull the curtain back on all this, it'd be fair to say, I believe that I'm at war with the God of the Bible. And, Pepper, it's been now, I don't know, 2 or 3 years in which I've just been really aware of the part of me that has believed since I was a teenager, since I was a young guy, that God is a tyrant.
Mm.
Not all of me believes this, but there is a part of me.
It's one of the things that brings up in me is, oftentimes we will, I don't want to say we, but I will make up stories about what people are thinking, what people are feeling about me, what people are, and it's all stuff that I've made up. And one of the things that what you're talking about now wakes me up to is that I'm making up stories about God. I'm making up stories about what he thinks of me and what he expects of me. And I don't think it's kind of an awakening for me to talk about it in this way.
Yeah. Well, and then I see that by extension, because I've made up this story about God, I then start to make up other stories about other people.
Right.
I think may have said here recently that I've made a list of people that I need to forgive. And it's so easy to, when I've made my list, it's so easy to name the things that they've done or not done. And as I also may have said, I'm having a conversation with my wife, Phyllis, about this one day. And she says, well, so what's the story that you're telling yourself about that person? And about, not just about that person, but the story that you're telling about the story that they're telling about you.
Right.
And I'm like, like so much of me forgiving someone else begins with my assumption that I'm at war with God and God doesn't care about this. I'm alone with this and I'm making stuff up.
Right. And 90% of the time, the person that you're holding the grudge against is not aware of it. That's the crazy thing. They haven't given one moment of their energy or time or thought or anything to this issue that you're having internally with them. Who's the winner here? I mean,
Dude, I am screwed up. I'm telling you.
Listen, we all are.
Dude, I'm like, okay, like all my patients are good. My patients here, they're like, oh, I need to find a different psychiatrist because this guy is troubled. Right. This guy is troubled.
Yeah,
all caps. But this is, I mean, but coming to terms, I mean, you think like, oh, this is why Paul is saying this. Like he is saying to people, no, you have peace with God. And for the people who are reading this letter, this would be a stunning announcement. For us, we read it, yeah, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am so anesthetized to the parts of me that are living as if I'm at war. I just have a bunch of other stories to, I make up stories that don't say it like that. They kind of sugarcoat it and keep me from being that connected to it. But we recognize then again with these words from Paul that the gospel tells a story of a God who's actually in the deep business of peacemaking. He's really serious about peacemaking. When you read in another of Paul's letters, in his letter to the church at Ephesus, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14, he writes that Jesus, in fact, is our peace. Which you're like, man, how do I get my head around that? Like, what is that? What does that even mean? Like, what does that even mean? Like, right. Because so often I think about peace as this like abstract thing. Or at the very most, it's like it's the absence of conflict. Like there's no war. But I think about when you get down to it, you think like, oh gosh, like one of the reasons why I like look forward to 10 o'clock Eastern time on Fridays
mm-hmm.
is because I'm going to be with you and Amy.
Mm-hmm.
And everything about our lives as we share them with each other creates literally within me, like in my embodied experience is one of like it's one long, comforting, comfortable exhale.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like that is the definition of peace. It's the definition of like, I am at rest. I am comfortable and confident in my embodied self because of the encounter I am having with you and Amy. Like it's not an abstract thing. It is a, if we had the technology, you could measure peace in my body because I am with you. And that is because of our King. And the work of the Holy Spirit means that peace is a viscerally felt neurophysiologic state of awareness of being at ease, not being asleep, not being distracted, not being, under anesthesia, but being fully present, fully awake, fully alert, and fully at ease because of the presence that we are encountering of another. And that's the thing, like, even today, I mean, for our listeners, we're recording in early January, and the month of December has been a long month for me.
Yeah,
we've had some significant losses, and I'm tired, and I am sad. And I turn my Zoom on at 10 o'clock, and I am not where I was 30 minutes ago because of the presence of the two of you. And this is exactly what Jesus is doing to the infinite degree. He is our peace. I need somebody else. I need an outside brain. I need somebody else. I need a mediator. I don't just construct a state of peace for myself by myself. I don't do this very well on my own. We don't do this well on our own. Peacemaking that commences in this embodied, earned, secure attachment relationship with Jesus via the Holy Spirit and his body is really what Paul's getting at. That we have peace because of real, not because in the abstract, it hasn't just been declared, in it's happening in real time and space. It's lived out. We've talked in many places about those 4 S's, about being seen, soothed, safe, secure. These are all embodied actions. And these actions it's hard work. And as we were, this didn't make it into the book exactly, but it reminds me of that 4th W that you brought to our attention when it comes to being aware of beauty. We talked about it being just this notion of wonder, this notion of welcome, and this notion of worship. And then you said, yeah, and it takes work.
Yeah.
And peacemaking is an act of beauty, and it takes all kinds of work for that to happen.
It does. And, when you talk about that peace that you feel at 10 o'clock on Friday, 10 o'clock Eastern on Friday mornings, and I experience, the same thing that you're talking about as you're saying it. I could be saying it the same words. Can you talk about how, that's because, as you say, that's because of the King. That's because our relationship and we know each other, but really that's how we're experiencing the peace of Jesus.
Yeah.
Is through our relationship and through one another. I don't know how personally, maybe there is a way. I don't know how I could experience that, alone by myself. I'm sure some of the contemplatives, may say that there are ways to get there and that kind of thing. But for me personally, it's always been through relationship with other people.
Right. Because even in some respects, my capacity to entertain and practice contemplative work,
mm-hmm.
right? Silent prayer, centering prayer, and many folks who practice this will report that they have an overwhelming sense of peace and tranquility when they do this work. There's no question about that. And then you have to go about your regular day. And that is not to diminish or minimize or dismiss those kinds of practices. But it is to say that what is really important when we read this text, it's easy for me to read this text and for me to think the most important peace that I have is the peace that I want to experience internally for me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be at peace. This is not unimportant, but for Paul, that's not the leading edge of his peace that he's talking about. He says we have peace with God. And then when he writes in the letter to Galatians, he talks about how we have peace between each other, Jews and Gentiles, that Jesus didn't come just to bridge the gap between us and God, but bridge the gap between us and our enemies. And see, the part of the challenge is if I'm in my contemplative state, that's different than me having a conversation with the person who's on my list that I need to forgive. It might help me be a little more at ease when I talk to them, but that's a very different thing than us working out the relationship. We've had, we've had moments in our relationships, the three of us, in which things have happened and we've had, I don't think they've been major, but there have been minor ruptures
mm-hmm.
that we've had to repair. And so we're not just talking about, I can have peace within myself. It's no, we're going to work for peace between me and Amy and Pepper when we have ruptures. We're called to be peacemakers because it's not always going to be peaceful.
It's not. No relationship is going to always be peaceful. And there is so, one of the most important things that I've found about relationships with, in conversation with you and everything is that repair of rupture.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it gets, that's where it gets stronger when you
Right.
go back and you dig into those things and you repair those things. The repair actually is stronger than the original fabric.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm.
Right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I remember, I was 16, 17 years of age. And I was a Jesus follower at the time. And I had this relationship with another guy in my high school. And this guy had joined our youth group. And on the surface, it would appear that he was joining the youth group because he wanted to be, he was interested in faith and so forth and so on. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that he was joining the youth group because of the girl that he was interested in. That, as it turned out, so was I. But I didn't have the courage to name that. And so they start to kind of hang out and then they start to date or whatever. And there's all this, what to me felt like this false sincerity about why he was really there. And I'm like, okay, fine. You can come but just be honest with me about why you're here. Right. And so our youth group went on this big retreat. And the speaker, I'll never forget, the speaker at the retreat was a guy that I really respected, and he knew me, and I went to him, and I said, "Okay, here's what's going on," and I'm really mad because it's just like I'm feeling like please don't pretend this crap. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like 17 years old. I am so mad about this, right? And he said, well, why don't you talk to him? What do you mean? Why don't you talk? Well, yeah, let's just talk. And he said, if you want, well, I'll go with you. We'll talk. So this guy, I remember, he said, let me encourage you. And I said, no, you don't have to go. You don't have to go. I want to have this conversation, and I eventually did. But the whole time I'm talking with who, and at the end of the time, because I was honest, this my friend, I mean my erstwhile enemy, who became
that's a nascent idea to me. I'm sorry. The erstwhile enemy,
who after this conversation, we became friends. But the whole time that I'm talking to him, I'm imagining Bruce, the speaker, in the room. I needed a mediator, at least even in my own mind, to be in the room. I know that in this list of people that I, in me, that I'm at war with.
Right.
I've been practicing this one spiritual practice, and I'm imagining sitting at my kitchen table with Jesus and with this person. And at first glance, it's like I thought okay, Jesus wants me to talk to this person, right? And but no, Jesus in this practice, Jesus looks at me and says, "I just want you to watch. You watch me, and I'm going to talk to this person." And it has had a really profound effect on me. When I'm watching someone else, nobody's getting let off the hook. But he is speaking with such loving kindness and such wisdom and so forth with this person. And there's no blaming, there's no whatever. But the felt sense that I'm watching a mediator do peace work because he's asking me to live like he does. This is what Jesus is doing. And if I can watch him, then I can do this. I can have a mindset that is, because I need the presence of somebody else in the room to help me do this hard work. And this is, we've said so often that the brain can do a lot of hard work for a really long time as long as it doesn't have to do it by itself. And then I can hear Jesus turn to me and say, "Now I want you to practice that. Just practice. I'm going to sit here. I want you to practice, but I want you to watch me care for someone, and then mimic what I'm doing." And there is a felt sense in which I'm not being blamed. I'm not being told to do something that I don't feel like I can do or that I want to do. But the very process of watching him do it is me wanting to want to do it. But I just want to say, this is all just a reminder that, remember, this is all part of the run-up to suffering for Christians. This notion that God is making peace and that we are called to be peacemakers, even with our suffering. These are really important preemptive things that we have to begin to embody and meditate on and practice as we encounter and imagine the suffering that we're in, and have our attention drawn to this. One of the in recent years, one of the models for imagining the interior life psychologically that we've encountered has been the model of what we call internal family systems. And Richard Schwartz is a psychologist who back in the 80s began to think about this, and this has been rolled out now over several decades and has become a really helpful way for us to imagine that we have these internal parts of us, some of which are at war with God and some of which are not at war with God. So we have the parts of us that are funny and the parts of us that are serious, the parts of us that are afraid, the parts that are self-conscious, all these different parts, the parts of me that suddenly become a teenager that used to be, as we've said, I think here before. I go home to our family when we were early marrieds, my wife and I, and she'd say, "Great being with your family, but I didn't know this teenager who showed up, who was me," because that part of me just showed up. And we see this in the Psalms, in the 40th Psalm, where David has this conversation where he said, "I said to my soul, why art thou downcast?" So there's the part of David that is asking the question, and the part of David to whom the question is being put. And we have these different parts. One of I think we've talked about this book here on this podcast before. There's a book called Boundaries for Your Soul by my good friends Allison Cook and Kimberly Miller that explores this notion of internal family systems from a Christian perspective. I would highly recommend that. But what we recognize is that there are just various parts of our experience, various parts of us, some of which are quite comfortable and confident that we are at peace with God. But like I said, there's been a part of me that's been lingering around for a long time that believes that God's a tyrant and has been living since I was probably 13 or 14 as if I'm at war with God. It's like in World War II, the Japanese soldiers who were on different island outposts, and when the war ended, they never heard about it.
Right.
And it was, I think, the last of these soldier outposts, I think it was in the early 1970s, in fact. The older people who still thought that the war was on, and they would not put their arms down until the Allies brought Japanese officers. Once again, I need a mediator.
Right.
Who will tell me the war's over, you can put down your arms. I need somebody that I can trust, who communicates the gospel to me, and who can communicate that gospel to these various parts of my experience that require putting down their weapons. And, like we were saying earlier about these stories that you and I make up.
Right.
These are stories that I make up to protect myself. It's like a weapon that I develop. And every time I think about that story, every time I tell that story, there's a bullet in the chamber, and I'm firing, maybe into the dark. But I'm actively living like I'm in a war zone, that part of me. And Jesus is trying to get me to put down my weapon. And this whole notion of us being at peace is really crucial, because when it comes to our suffering, as we'll talk about, that so much of our suffering comes because of what I'm doing to myself in the stories that I tell about others, about God. And so this notion of having peace with God, beginning to imagine, beginning to take it seriously, beginning to like explore and examine, like, what are the parts of me that still believe that I'm at war with God, is important because it heralds this. It's preparing us for how we will get a new footing, as it were, and heralds what we're going to be talking about in the next episode. But our longing today is for us, as we prepare eventually to talk more robustly about our suffering, is to be curious about where, first, we still believe that we're at war with God and the people that we are at war with, because Jesus wants to make peace.
Yes. And that brings us to our activity for you all this week, between now and next week. And Curt has implored us for this next week, to reflect on the degree to which you live as if you are at war with God. Consider the different parts of you that have perhaps you have kept hidden, such that they are unaware that the war is over, like the Japanese soldiers that Curt was talking about. What protective mechanisms have you put into place to keep you from making peace? And once you've done that, consider what your fears are that would keep you from believing that God is to be trusted as a peacemaker. And then lastly, in the imagery of IFS, what parts of you are you aware of that before this conversation you did not know were present? What has been your posture towards them? And if you have not, please consider reading Cook's and Miller's book to get a better understanding of this way of thinking. Boundaries for Your Soul is a reminder, is the name of that book. All right, Curt. Thank you for today. I'm looking forward to diving deeper next week, taking the next step. I love the way this book it is revealing itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, I'm just thinking about, as we think about next week, because we're going to talk about what it means to be embodied. We're going to talk about what this has to do with suffering, and just as a reminder that this way in which we live out the notions, different parts of us that believe that we're at war with God, they also aren't just abstractions. These are things that create disintegrated states within our minds. It increases my level of distress, anxiety, my stress hormones, my ACTH and my cortisol levels. My brain is more likely to be swimming around in that. It can increase my blood pressure. There's a whole range of distress that I have, these little micro skirmishes that are going on all over the place in my landscape. And if I'm not paying attention to them explicitly and directly, then what I'm doing is I'm burning a ton of energy to keep them out of my conscious awareness. And that literally has the effect of increasing the stress that my brain has to contend with, that I carry and house in my body, and that then makes that energy unavailable to me to live fruitfully, to live generatively, to create beauty and goodness in the world where I'm living relationally. It makes it more difficult for me to be a peacemaker in other places, even where I feel like I really want to be, because I don't have as much energy available for me to do that, to take the kinds of risks, and or to begin to imagine that our peacemaking captain, Jesus, is in the room, asking us, like, look at me. Jesus would say, look at me, and know that I am here to make peace between you and your enemy. I am your peace. I'm not leaving it all up to you. Watch me do this, and then you do this. But I don't expect you to do this by yourself. Whether that's making peace with your real enemies, be that in your family or your workplace or your church or, your neighbor across the street, or if it's those parts of you. I mean, we go to war with parts of ourselves. There are parts of ourselves that we hate, parts of ourselves that we think about what happened to us when we were a kid, or what the part of me that experienced a particular marriage, or our, the dozens of ways in which we're suffering. And we look at those and we often see them as a scourge. We see them as this awful thing that we're at war with them. We're at war with ourselves. And Jesus walks into the room and says, no. Good Friday and Easter took care of death. I've got that all taken care of. You don't need to kill those parts of yourself that you hate. I've come to save them, not kill them. And just as we wrap this up, I'm just saying it's just really a joy to be doing this work with you and Amy Pepper, because it's a reminder every time we do this. It's a reminder that Jesus is not a tyrant. And he's an actor from Cincinnati.
Oh my gosh! No. Oh, gracious.
Right on.
Listen, folks, if you are a listener to this podcast, we are so grateful that you are with us in this journey. We do ask a couple things from you. We would love for you to subscribe to the podcast, because that helps us out a lot. And along with subscribing, if you feel the urge, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. That's also helpful. We want to continue to spread the word as much as possible, because we believe that I believe that this work can help everyone. And so we would love to have more and more people be impacted by this. So thank you in advance for doing those couple things for us. And some of you who do not watch us on YouTube, who listen to us, may not know, but every week producer Amy joins us for a post-show discussion, and that's going to be happening in here just a little bit. Babu. It's going to be happening in here in just a second, so stick around for that.
Like I said, an actor from Cincinnati and a producer from LA who's about to join us.
Yes. Love you, Curt.
Love you, man.
Hey, Ann.
Hey.
Welcome to Oh My Gosh.
She's practiced. I was going to say, she's practiced.
Trying.
She's practiced. She is not going to do it.
I don't have to practice. Oh, I'm
right.
She's resisting.
I don't want to make you so self-conscious about it, because it's endearing.
No.
It is. I love it.
It's what?
Endearing.
Yeah. Right on.
And yes, it is. Oh my gosh. Because, okay, so the idea that I am at war with God, that's a hard one for me to wrap my head around. And as I was reading the chapter this week, and I'm like, this work, we have to sit with it, right? It's not like I can hear that idea and then just get it, make that connection.
Right.
So here's what, as you guys were talking and as I was reading, but Curt, the story of you at youth group with the guy, okay, violence is easy, as you say, and peacemaking is Herculean. And the only way you were able, because violence is easy, I can feel it when it takes very little effort. And the only way you were able to be a peacemaker in that was because Bruce first introduced the idea let's talk to him. Ah, no, that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting you were going to join me in my violence. Like,
right. You signed the treaty with me.
Yeah. No.
He goes to war with me.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the only way, so then we have to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. We have to have relationships where we are seen, soothed, safe, and secure. So we actually have somebody to bring into we do with Jesus.
Totally.
But we need a Bruce too that we can bring into the room with us.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And no matter how much we want to separate people from embodying Jesus, we can't.
Nope. No.
Yeah, when Curt, when you were talking about the practice that you do of forgiveness, and you were saying, and there's all these people that I could line up, and I'm thinking, so, but is what you're saying in this chapter, the war isn't even really with them. Mm-mm. With each one of those individuals, the war is with their creator.
Right.
And who put them there in the first place.
And that's the
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The man you put in this place, the woman you put in this place.
Yeah.
Everything you do to the least of my brothers.
That's right. Yeah. They're proxies. They're standing in for God.
Yeah.
And it'd be much easier for me to blame them, because if I actually had to contend with God,
yeah,
that's not going to be fun.
It's not going to go so well.
No.
Yeah.
So then this other thing that came up for me this week as I was, again, reading the chapter and thinking things through. And this is going to be part of the game that Pep and I play, where we say something and then Curt makes sense of it.
Right.
But so I've been doing this new thing. It's a longer, not riveting story, but I write every day, journal a little bit every day, at least 2 minutes. And I've been doing it in the morning, and I have become aware of how much anxiety I wake up with, which until I wrote about it, until I started writing, I wasn't even aware of it at the front of my mind. And so I wake up with this anxiety, and I think, after talking about this chapter, like, I am so afraid I am not going to get what I want or what I think I need. And then my response to that is trying to appease the gods that I serve.
Yep, totally.
And that does not get me what I think I need.
No. It just reinforces being afraid of the gods.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's like, we so easily say those ancients. So what did they obviously those poor unenlightened people who didn't really know that there weren't really gods better. And so forth, all the things, and they were unlike me, who's but I mean, that's exactly what they were doing. Am I going to have rain? Am I going to have food? Are we going to have progeny? Right? Are we going to have enough to, help, harvest? All the things that we're afraid it's a world of scarcity. And the scarcity tells me that the gods are upset with me. The gods are not. So I gotta appease. And I just have different ways of doing it.
Right. And then, okay, so the definition of hope, which I have to read because if this is possible, then in the anxiety, I am not really full of hope. Okay, the mental state in which we anticipate a future of goodness and beauty.
Right.
Gosh, there's a better way.
Yeah.
And then, the three of us talking about this even now, it's I want to understand the anxiety and how to get rid of it. And this is how to do it. Because I can't do it on my own.
Right.
We can't do it on our own.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this, I mean, we'll get to this. I mean, we're already stepping into this territory. But I mean, my impression, I'll say this, my experience of all of what I write about, largely it's my own life and so forth, but it's largely what happens in the office with the dozens and now hundreds of people that I've treated over the years. And there is this sense in which when they talk about hope, they talk about it as a thing that it's this thing that I hope, like I'm able to hope. I hope that I have hope.
Yeah.
Like somehow something else is going to happen outside of me over which I have no agency, and then that will give me hope. Something else. I don't have any sense that I have any agency in actually forming it and actually creating it. But this is, I think, in many respects, the whole point of the gospel. Jesus is saying, you don't have hope now because I just magically tell you have hope.
Yeah.
No, you have hope because I'm inviting you to have a real embodied relationship with me, and let that real material world experience do the work of changing your awareness of the world. I mean, again, God takes us and partnering with us in the creation of all of this faith, hope, and love. He takes us so much more seriously than we do, than we take ourselves.
Yeah.
He wants, no, I made you to be real adults, and I want you to grow older. I want you to grow up. I want you to grow up and to become ready to take on the role of ruling other members of the divine council. Angels. I mean, this is what Paul says. Like, you're going to rule over angels. And I'm like, oh,
I can hardly roll over.
I can't rule over my own sock drawer. Gosh.
Okay, I'm going to end where you guys began, with laughter. Because as we talked about last week, which I can't remember why we talked about this, that I keep a laughter log. And then I think about, okay, what we pay attention to, we remember. And what we remember becomes our anticipated future. And like, laughter is a vulnerable act. It's a generous act. You have to have some level of safety, feel a sense of safety to do it. And I remember one time, and this is not even that funny, but
thank you for that caveat before you tell the joke.
It's
isn't funny.
It's like a stand-up. It's like a stand-up comic. He gets up on stage and says, "Just so you know, I'm not very good at this." I hope you didn't. I hope you're okay with how much you paid by the time that you leave the theater.
Because okay, so we were at Seasons, the three of us, and we had sometimes had assignments, assignments is not a good word, like activities, whatever.
It's a good word. I just didn't do my assignments much of the time. I would drive Pepper crazy with the assignments I was
because you
blowing.
wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
No, So this one, we were all given pens. We had a box of pens at each table, and Pep pulled out a pen, and he's like, well, this one doesn't work. And I kind of see out of the corner of my eye, he tosses it and gets another one. And then that one didn't work. You remember this, Curt? So then he gets the third one, and we're like, oh my gosh, you buffoon. At the end of the pen, there's like this little nib of, I don't know if it's plastic.
Like plastic, yeah.
Yeah, and you have to take it off. But Pepper was like, how is it that I'm getting every pen that doesn't work? And we were...
I've gone through three boxes of pens.
Meanwhile, you watched me do this without offering any insight until you could really make fun of me about it.
Before long, like there's like
the whole room's in on it.
There's like four tables sitting over here, like we're all just watching Pep across the bed,
shaking, trying to get the ink to come out.
He's like, why is it working?
Pens are awful.
Else?
Why did you buy these pens? Yes.
So all it takes is, but we do. Then we anticipate. Like, that's a shift in our.
Yeah. Totally. There's a comedian and a comic routine. I'm sure you're both familiar with it, called "Defending the Caveman." And this I don't know if it originated. I thought it originated here in D.C. And this would have been now, 30 years ago. And I will never forget our friend Leslie Reed. Okay. She said, hey, there's this show, we got to go. And so there were a bunch of us from our covenant group that all went together. And it was, in this intimate, packed, hot room, like down in some basement is what it feel like you're going to, where all feels you're not in some theater, right? Because he's just getting started. And I have a foggy memory, but it felt like he just went for 90 minutes. He just goes for 90 minutes. And I mean, the laughter, the vulnerability, the openness, how thick it, he didn't give you any breathing space. I mean, you might have, as he then goes to the next part of the story that he's telling, it's like one long monologue that's all the parts are connected, and all like you only had maybe 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds at the most in between your being doubled over with laughter. And of course it's happening. Everybody else around you, this kind of corporate 90-minute space of utter vulnerability and joy. And you think there is a major element of what heaven is like. That is this. That, every couple of days, there's going to be a stand-up routine. Hey, I hear down the street, there's going to be a stand-up routine tonight. We're all going. And this felt sense of peace through that kind of laughter that is something that is like, and that, I forget the artist's name, the comedian's name who developed this and who started this, but like the amount of so beauty, to Pepper, to your point, beauty and work, the amount of work that went into his writing.
Oh my God.
And delivering
the timing, who knows how many hours of practice that he'd had with other smaller, venues, people in his living room, whatever you're talking about, as he gets ready for all this.
Rob Becker.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, yeah. Just, and like they say, like the comedians, like they are the ones who are willing to say what everybody else in the room is thinking, but is unwilling to say.
Right.
And just,
yeah. This was great today, you guys. Thank you. Sometimes I forget we're recording.
Yeah.
No,
which isn't the best quality for someone who's hosting a podcast. Oh yeah. Whoops.
The person's already walked their dog. They're now in their car.
Yeah.
They're just like, look, I gotta go, guys. I gotta take a shower. Could you please wrap this up?
Yeah,
exactly.
I can't wear my AirPods into the shower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Until next week,
all right,
you guys.
All right. Love you guys.
Love you.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.